Welcome to Reading the Gospels together for Tuesday, August 11th. And today we're reading Acts chapter 6. Now, I'm sure you've noticed the little summaries in chapters 2, 4, and 5 describing the early faith communities of the followers of Jesus. They wouldn't be called Christians until a bit later. A common characteristic of these descriptions is the social work in which the church was engaged, particularly in regards to the healing and care of the sick and the provision to those in need. Now, by the time we reach chapter 6, this social outreach work is becoming too much for the apostles to administrate, particularly when inevitable problems arise. Now, remember, the early communities of faith were comprised almost entirely of Jews, with non-Jews being rare exceptions to the rule. But even within Judaism, there are separate and distinct groups. We've heard about religious parties like the Sadducees and Pharisees. Now we learn that there are distinct cultural and linguistic groups among the Jewish Christians as well. Specifically, there are Greek-speaking Jews, Greek being the predominant language throughout the lands of the Roman Empire, thanks to Hellenization or Greek cultural domination begun by Alexander the Great some 350 years before. Then there are Aramaic-speaking Jews, most of whom grew up in the area within and immediately surrounding Israel. This is a bit like the primary cultural division between the two major groups of Jews today. Sephardic Jews from Spain, North Africa, Iran, Iraq, and Ashkenazi Jews from Europe. There are tensions between these groups in Israel today. Who gets the better jobs, better social assistance, gets elected to the various political parties and leadership, and so on. Now, believe it or not, that's the kind of problem the disciples, the apostles themselves, run into. It turns out the believers were distributing food to the needy on a daily basis, and a significant number of the needy were widows. Widows being a particularly vulnerable group in that society. The Greek-speaking widows were complaining that the Aramaic-speaking widows were being favored in the distribution. So the apostles called a meeting of all the disciples. Not sure if all the disciples means the whole community of believers or only those in particular positions. And they say, it wouldn't be right for us to neglect the ministry of God in order to wait on tables. Brothers and sisters, choose 7 men from among you who are known to be full of the Spirit and wisdom. We'll turn this responsibility over to them, and we'll give our attention to prayer and to the ministry of the word. So note right off the bat that there are 2 prongs to the outreach of the church, the preaching ministry outreach and the social ministry outreach. And the established pattern for the church to this day is a 2-pronged approach that always has to be kept in balance. So, 7 men, we are told, are chosen for this task, and there's something very interesting in the men who they choose. All the names are Greek. Now remember, it's the Greek faction which lodged the complaints, and so Greeks are chosen to solve the problem. That shows a great deal of political savvy on the part of the early apostles. Note also it includes a fellow named Nicholas from Antioch, described as a convert to Judaism. The time had not yet come for the church to consider non-Jews as eligible for inclusion in the community of believers, but converts to Judaism, like our man Nicholas from Antioch, are okay. It would be some years yet before an even larger faction than Greek-speaking and Aramaic-speaking Jews was to enter the Christian faith, the Gentiles. But that is still some years ahead of our story today. Now, don't miss the impact of this decision and the social outreach undertaken by the church. As a result of the appointment of these men and the ministry of compassion and carrying social relief, particularly regarding the distribution of food, as a result of that, we read in verse 7, so the word of God spread. Now, get what just happened there. Luke's talking about the social ministry of the distribution of food, particularly to widows. So, as a result of that, the word of God spread. The number of disciples in Jerusalem increased rapidly, and a large number of priests became obedient to the faith. A large number of priests. The church, you see, earned its good reputation among the people with tangible acts of kindness to the most vulnerable, and the wider community responded by investigating this new faith, and many, even a large number of priests, became believers as well. When the church engages in mission, results follow, credibility grows. Now, notable among those 7 who were appointed, those 7 servers, which is what deacon means, among those is a man named Stephen, described as full of God's grace and power. As the church began to meet with success, even among the priesthood, it was inevitable that opposition arose. Now, we're told that the source of this opposition is from among the Greek-speaking synagogue of the freedmen, perhaps established by those in generations past who were in slavery, who had managed to earn their freedom. Now, slavery in the Middle East in those days was different than American slavery of the 17 and 1800s. It was possible back then for slaves to serve for a period of time, after which they would be freed. Other slaves could be freed as a result of faithful service or of earning sufficient funds to pay for their own release, and so on. There was no specific ethnic character to slavery. A slave could come from any ethnic group, either through military conquest or indebtedness, or as a result of personal poverty or unemployment. Slave wasn't a thing about what color or race or ethnic group you happen to be. It had more to do with your financial condition and your political situation. Now, this synagogue of the freedmen, we're told, had engaged with Stephen in debate, doubtless regarding the claims of the Christian faith regarding Jesus. And viewing him as a threat to their belief, they denounced him to the Sanhedrin under trumped-up charges. It's a familiar pattern, worked once before with Jesus. In fact, much the same charges were leveled at Stephen as were brought against Jesus that we read about in the Gospels. Now, this is a momentous moment in the life of the church. You see, thus far, it appears as though for a number of years, once again, thanks to Luke, how many, we don't know, but for a number of years, despite occasional run-ins with the authorities, the disciples had been able to exist within the wider umbrella of Judaism, continuing to worship at the temple and functioning as an offshoot of, but still within, mainstream Jewish faith. But the charges against Stephen are bringing the key differences between Judaism and Christianity to light. Mainly that Christians, again themselves Jews, regarded Jesus as Messiah, and the remainder of the Jews did not. While still worshiping at the temple, the Christians regarded belief in Jesus as of greater importance, in fact, than all the temple rituals and ceremony. Up to this point, it's a family disagreement between Judaism and that part of Judaism which identifies with Jesus as the Messiah. But the family disagreement was quickly becoming a family feud, and the breaking point is coming fast. The lengthy chapter 7 is Stephen's response to these charges, and as it marks the divorce between mainstream Judaism and the followers of Jesus, Luke devotes an entire chapter to the speech that Stephen gives. Stephen will go in his speech all the way back to Abraham, the founding father of Judaism, to make his argument. But that argument is for tomorrow, and we'll see you then.